My child, wait, do not rush past this moment. There is something unfolding behind the curtain of ordinary life, and if you listen carefully, you may recognize pieces of your own story hidden within it. What you are about to hear is not a coincidence. It is a glimpse into a conversation that changed everything. Your soulmate had been carrying your name in silence for longer than anyone realized. Not because they wanted to hide you, but because some feelings grow so deep that words struggle to hold them. Every thought of you felt larger than explanation. Every memory seemed to carry a weight that could not be placed into a simple conversation. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. The room was quiet. The world outside moved as usual. Cars passed. Clocks ticked. Familiar routines continued. Yet inside that ordinary moment, your soulmate found themselves unable to stay silent any longer. They sat across from their mother. At first, the conversation seemed small. Casual. Harmless. But then your name appeared. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a single mention. And suddenly everything shifted. Their mother noticed the change immediately. She saw the pause. The hesitation. The look in their eyes. Have you ever noticed how some people can read emotions before a word is spoken? She could. And what happened next was something your soulmate never expected. Stay with me, because this is where the story begins to reveal its deeper meaning. Their mother asked a simple question. Who is this person? The question sounded ordinary. But it landed like thunder. Because for the first time, your soulmate had to speak honestly about what you truly meant to them. Not the version they showed the world. Not the version they pretended was just friendship. Not the version hidden behind excuses. The real version. The truth. Slowly, they began talking about you. They talked about your energy. Your kindness. The way your presence remained in their thoughts long after conversations ended. The strange comfort they felt whenever your name appeared. The feeling that somehow, against all logic, their future kept leading back toward you. As the words continued, their mother listened carefully. Very carefully. Almost too carefully. And then something unusual happened. She stopped speaking. The room became still. Your soulmate noticed it immediately. Because sometimes silence says more than 1,000 explanations. Why had she gone quiet? What was she thinking? What had she noticed? Those questions started racing through your soulmate's mind. And then came the moment that nobody saw coming. The moment connected directly to the title of this message. Their mother suddenly stood up. Her eyes widened. Her voice rose with emotion. And she shouted words that echoed through the room. You are. But before we reveal what followed, understand something important. This was not anger. This was not disappointment. This was not criticism. No. It was shock. Pure shock. The kind that arrives when someone suddenly sees a bigger picture. The kind that appears when hidden pieces finally connect. The kind that emerges when a truth becomes impossible to ignore. Your soulmate froze. Because they had never seen their mother react this way before. Not once. Not ever. And in that suspended moment, it felt as if time itself had paused. What could possibly create such a reaction? What had she understood? What had she seen that your soulmate could not yet see for themselves? Listen closely. Because the answer carries a message far beyond this story. Sometimes the people closest to us notice destiny before we do. Sometimes outsiders recognize a connection while those inside it remain confused. And sometimes a person who has lived through decades of experience can identify a rare bond the moment they hear it described. That is exactly what was happening. The more your soulmate spoke about you, the clearer something became. This was not an ordinary attachment. Not an ordinary memory. Not an ordinary chapter. You were becoming impossible to replace. And somewhere deep inside, their mother realized it. But what she shouted next, what she revealed, would leave your soulmate staring at the floor in complete silence. And what it meant for the future of this connection is even more surprising. Stay a little longer. Because the next part uncovers the exact words that followed those shocking first 3 words. You are. And once they were spoken, nothing felt the same again. A strange thing happens when a truth has been hiding in plain sight for too long. The moment it finally steps into the light, everyone in the room feels it. So pause here for a second, because the next piece of this story carries the very answer your soulmate never expected to hear. Their mother stood there, looking directly at them. The room felt different now. Not louder. Not quieter. Just different. As though an invisible line had been crossed. And then she finished the sentence. You are in love with them. The words landed instantly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No confusion. Just certainty. Absolute certainty. Your soulmate tried to respond. They tried to explain. They tried to soften the meaning. They laughed nervously. They changed subjects. They searched for reasons. But every explanation only proved her point. The more they spoke, the more obvious it became. Because sometimes people reveal their deepest feelings while trying to hide them. Their mother listened patiently. Then she said something that stopped the conversation all over again. She told them that she had never heard them talk about anyone the way they talked about you. Not once. Not in years. Not ever. She pointed out details your soulmate never realized they were revealing. The way their face changed when your name came up. The way their voice became softer. The way they remembered tiny moments most people would have forgotten long ago. And suddenly your soulmate found themselves unable to argue. Because deep inside, they knew she was seeing something real. Something they had been trying to understand themselves. Now here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because the conversation did not end there. In fact, that was only the beginning. Their mother sat back down and asked a question so simple that it sounded almost insignificant. Yet it carried enormous weight. She asked, if this person means so much to you, why are you acting as if they don't? Silence. Complete silence. No answer came immediately. Because some questions do not challenge the mind. They challenge the heart. And your soulmates suddenly found themselves facing emotions they had pushed aside for far too long. Have you ever noticed how life keeps bringing certain people back into your awareness? A name appears unexpectedly. A memory surfaces without warning. A feeling returns when you least expect it. That is exactly what had been happening to them. And their mother could see it. She could see that every road somehow led back to thoughts of you. Not through obsession. Not through fantasy. But through significance. You mattered. Far more than they had admitted. Far more than they had expressed. Far more than they had allowed themselves to believe. The conversation stretched late into the evening. Stories were shared. Memories resurfaced. Moments that seemed small suddenly looked important. And with every passing minute, something became clearer. Your soulmate was no longer speaking about you as a chapter from the past. They were speaking about you as someone connected to their future. That realization frightened them. Not because it was negative. but because meaningful things often require courage. And courage is something many people spend years developing. Now listen carefully. Because this next detail changes everything. At one point, their mother smiled. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just a quiet smile. The kind that comes from understanding something before another person understands it themselves. And she said, "Some people enter your life for a season. Others arrive because they belong somewhere in your story." Those words remained with your soulmate long after the conversation ended. Days later. Weeks later. Even now. Because they could not stop wondering whether you were one of those rare people. The kind who become part of a person's larger journey. The kind who leave a mark that time cannot erase. The kind who continue appearing in someone's thoughts even when life becomes busy. And little by little, the answer seemed impossible to avoid. Before we continue, let me say something to everyone listening. If this message resonates with you, if you've ever felt that life was quietly arranging pieces behind the scenes, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. And if these stories speak to your heart, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Because the next part reveals something even more surprising. After that conversation ended, your soulmate thought everything would return to normal. It didn't. In fact, something happened over the following days that made those words, "You are in love with them," feel less like an opinion. And more like a realization that could no longer be ignored. And when their mother noticed it happening, she said one final sentence that left your soulmate completely speechless. That moment is waiting in part 3. Not every revelation arrives with noise. Some arrive quietly, like a single light turning on in a dark room. And what happened after that conversation was exactly that kind of revelation. So stay with me, because this is where the story begins to move in a direction nobody expected. For several days, your soulmate tried to continue life as usual. They woke up. They handled responsibilities. They answered messages. They followed routines. From the outside, everything appeared normal. But inside, something had changed. The words their mother had spoken refused to leave their mind. Again and again, they replayed the conversation. Again and again, they found themselves remembering details they had overlooked before. And then something remarkable happened. The more they tried not to think about you, the more they thought about you. Not because they were forcing it. Not because they were searching for it. But because awareness changes everything. Once a truth becomes visible, it becomes difficult to pretend it is invisible. Suddenly they began noticing patterns. Moments that once seemed random now appeared connected. Memories that felt ordinary suddenly carried meaning. Even small things started triggering thoughts of you. A familiar song. A phrase someone said. A place they passed. A dream they almost forgot. Your name seemed to exist everywhere. And each reminder carried the same silent question. Why? Why did this connection continue to remain present? Why did it refuse to fade? Why did it feel different from everything else? The answers were coming closer. Closer than your soulmate realized. Then one evening, their mother noticed something. Something so obvious she couldn't ignore it. Your soulmate had been sitting quietly, staring into space. Not sad. Not distracted. Just thoughtful. The kind of thoughtful that comes when a person is standing at the edge of an important realization. She looked at them and smiled. Not because she knew everything. But because she recognized the expression. She had seen it before. Years earlier. In other people. In stories. In moments where someone's heart finally caught up with what their soul already knew. And then she spoke. Her voice was calm. Certain. Steady. She said. You keep looking for proof, but your actions have already answered the question. The room became silent. Because those words went deeper than anything she had said before. Think about that for a moment. How often do people search for signs while ignoring their own behavior? How often do they ask for certainty while living as though certainty already exists? That was exactly what your soulmate was doing. They were searching for answers. Yet every answer was already reflected in their attention. Their memories. Their emotions. Their choices. And suddenly they could no longer deny it. You occupied a space within their heart that nobody else occupied. That realization did not arrive dramatically. It arrived honestly. And honesty can be far more powerful. Now here is where the story takes another unexpected turn. Because their mother shared something she had never told them before. She explained that life occasionally places certain people in our path who become mirrors. People who reveal parts of ourselves we never noticed. People who inspire growth without even trying. People who challenge us to become more than we were yesterday. And then she asked a question. A question that completely changed the atmosphere. What if this person entered your life for a reason bigger than either of you understand right now? Your soulmate had no immediate answer. But that question stayed with them. Days passed. Then more days. And instead of disappearing, the question grew stronger. What if? What if meeting you was not random? What if every delay carried purpose? What if every lesson had been preparing both of you for something greater? And what if the future was still writing chapters neither of you could see yet? Pause here for a moment. Because this is where many people stop looking. They assume the story is finished. They assume what they see today is all there is. But the most meaningful journeys rarely reveal themselves all at once. They unfold piece by piece. Moment by moment. Realization by realization. And your soulmate was beginning to understand that. What shocked them most was not their mother's words. It was the fact that those words kept proving themselves true. Every day brought another reminder. Another realization. Another small confirmation that your connection carried significance. Not because it was perfect. Not because it was effortless. But because it mattered. Deeply. Genuinely. Unmistakably. And somewhere within that growing awareness, your soulmate finally stopped asking whether you were important. Instead, they started asking something entirely different. What should they do about it? That question opened a door. A door that leads directly into the next chapter of this story. Because what happened after they began searching for that answer surprised even their mother. A conversation took place. A decision started forming. And a truth about your connection emerged that neither of them saw coming. You'll understand everything at the end. Because the next part reveals the choice your soulmate began considering after finally accepting what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. There comes a moment in every meaningful story when wondering is no longer enough. A person can only stand at the edge of a realization for so long before life quietly asks them to take a step forward. And for your soulmate, that moment was approaching faster than they expected. The question their mother had planted in their mind continued to grow. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Like a sunrise that slowly fills the horizon with light. What should you do about it? At first, your soulmate avoided the question. They focused on work. On responsibilities. On distractions. On everything except the one thing that truly mattered. Yet something fascinating happened. Every attempt to avoid the answer somehow brought them closer to it. Because truth has a way of waiting patiently. It doesn't chase. It doesn't force. It simply remains present until we are ready to acknowledge it. And one evening, after a long day filled with ordinary moments, your soulmate found themselves sitting alone. No noise. No interruptions. Just silence. The kind of silence that allows hidden thoughts to finally speak. And in that silence, they admitted something to themselves for the very first time. They missed you. Not in a passing way. Not in a temporary way. But in a way that revealed your importance. The realization surprised them. Because they had spent so much time analyzing the connection that they had forgotten to simply feel it. And feelings often tell the truth long before logic catches up. The next morning, their mother noticed a change. It was subtle. But unmistakable. The hesitation that had once filled their voice was fading. The confusion that had once clouded their thoughts was becoming clearer. And she knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't watching someone fall into uncertainty. She was watching someone step into clarity. That afternoon, she shared one final piece of wisdom. Something simple. Something powerful. Something your soulmate would never forget. She said. People spend years searching for extraordinary signs, while ignoring the person who already brings out the best in them. The words landed deeply. Because when your soulmate thought about you, they realized something important. You inspired growth. You inspired reflection. You inspired hope. Even during moments when life felt uncertain. And that realization changed the entire story. Suddenly, this was no longer about whether the connection existed. It was about what they were willing to do with it. Stay a little longer, because this next part matters. For the first time, your soulmate stopped asking questions based on fear. They stopped focusing on what could go wrong. They stopped replaying old doubts. Instead, they started imagining possibilities. And possibilities have incredible power. What if the future was more open than they assumed? What if the timing was still unfolding? What if the story wasn't ending? What if it was just beginning? Those questions created a shift. A shift from hesitation to awareness. From confusion to understanding. From uncertainty to quiet confidence. And then came a moment that even their mother didn't expect. A moment so small that most people would have overlooked it. Yet it carried enormous meaning. Your soulmate smiled. Not because they had every answer. Not because every obstacle had disappeared. But because they finally understood something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. Some connections are not meant to be rushed. Some revelations arrive exactly when they are needed. And some people remain in our hearts because they are meant to teach us something valuable about ourselves. That realization brought peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't come from certainty about the future. But from trust in the journey. Now before we continue, if this story has resonated with you, and if you felt these moments unfolding alongside the narration, share your thoughts below. Many people discover they're not alone through conversations in the comments. And if you've been enjoying this journey, subscribing is a simple way to stay connected to future messages like this one. Because what happens next is perhaps the most surprising part of all. The story was never really about what their mother shouted. It wasn't even about the conversation itself. It was about what those words awakened. Awareness. Honesty. Courage. And soon, that courage would lead your soulmate toward a decision that changes the direction of this entire connection. A decision that begins with one simple realization. Some opportunities appear only when a person finally stops running from what they already know. And when your soulmate reached that realization, a new chapter quietly opened. One filled with possibility. One filled with meaning. One filled with a future that suddenly looked very different than it had before. That chapter begins in part 5.